fellow traveler. Welcome to Third Eye Awakening, a podcast all about spiritual and psychic awakening, where we talk about the shift from 3D to 5D consciousness, the nature of time, space, the universe, multi-dimensions, starseeds, the Akashic Records, you know, all that good shit. I am your host, Amy Melissa. Thank you so much for being here with me today. All right, let's do this. Hello again, beautiful listeners. Welcome back for another episode of my podcast. I apologize for the delay in between the publication of my episode 3 and this next episode. I just could not find the time to record this episode, and because it is about the life and death of my son Cillian, it just deserved and required ample time and space. But I've got it now, so here I am. Okay, so as I said, this episode is all about, essentially it's the story of my beautiful son, Cillian, who came into my life somewhat unexpectedly and sadly couldn't stay for very long. And the reason that I want to tell this story is because it's so full of subtle magic. Subtle magic that, although it did not soften the incredible heartache and pain that came with losing him, it did transform me. And not only did it transform me, but it gave me an even deeper glimpse into the nature of life and the universe. And that's something that I'm really excited to share. So I guess I'll just get started. And I haven't really planned this episode out very well. This will be my first time talking about it in such great detail. And I'm just going to go on my memory and my raw emotions. I hope that my voice doesn't sound too flat as I recall it, but I'm reaching back into my past recollections. So it might sound a little bit flat. Hopefully the content is interesting enough to make up for it. All right, here I go with the story of Cillian Xavier Alexander McClellan. At the end of my last episode, episode 3, I talked about how I manifested my partner, Alex. And I am really excited to share that process with you guys, but I think that I will save it and do an episode just for that. Because it was a really cool experience and it will take quite a long time to explain it. And this episode is all about Cillian. But Alex is obviously part of it too because he's Cillian's father. So I'll sort of skip over the details, but I'll lay the foundation here. Prior to meeting Alex, as I said in a previous episode, I had been in a series of relationships that did not yield the results I wanted, let's put it that way, wherein I learned a lot and grew a lot. And the truth is that as much as I might choose words such as frustrating, pointless, dissatisfying, crappy, those would be the adjectives that I would use. As much as I might choose those adjectives to apply to those relationships, the truth is that they were a perfect match for the beliefs I held and the stories I was telling myself. So I really can't throw too much shade at those guys that I was with because they were just showing up in the way that I was calling them in and allowing them in. But after a while, I just started to be done with it. I was like, I don't even care anymore. Screw relationships. I'm finished with this. Before I could truly get there, though, I will tell you a little bit about the last relationship that I was in before meeting Alex. So basically, it was a relationship that was truly going nowhere. It was on again, off again for 4 years. And I will give you an example of of where exactly my beliefs were in terms of what I deserved and what I could manifest for myself in terms of relationships at that time. So when this guy and I will call him Brian. When Brian and I started seeing each other, he lived about 40 minutes away from where I lived. And I would always drive to see him on the weekends partly because he had his own place and I was living with my parents. So it was just a little bit, like we were adults, and it was just a little bit easier to sort of lay the groundwork for an adult relationship in his place. But also, truthfully, because I had Francis, and he really wasn't ready to be involved with a child. So red flag number one, that of course I ignored because hashtag stupid, hashtag human, hashtag live and learn. Anyway, so we started out seeing each other, and it was long distance, but it was only 40 minutes away, but I was always the one driving to see him. And by always, I mean literally always, not just most of the time, always. And his parents lived in the same town as my parents, and he would go visit them a lot, and he wouldn't visit me while he was in town visiting his parents. So, yeah. Anyway, about a year or a year and a half into our relationship, he had to change jobs, and he moved farther away from me, an hour and a half away. And again, I would always go and see him because that was sort of the standard that had been created in our relationship. So that was that. And then towards the end, in the last about 6 months of our relationship, his job took him about 4 hours away from where I lived. And again, it was always me driving to see him on the weekends. So, of course, there was only so long that I could put up with that, and only so long that I could fool myself with that. And I started to realize that this was not only going nowhere, but like he was literally physically and emotionally moving farther and farther away from me, but not being, brave enough to actually let go. Neither of us was. We kept trying to break up, and then one of us would, we'd miss each other, and then one of us would cave and reach out to the other, and the other person would cave, and we'd get back together, and it would never, ever change. It wasn't, I don't think that, at least on my part, it wasn't that I was afraid that I could never do better. It's just that we also had a history because we had known each other in our public schooling days, and I think I was just afraid of losing that, and I was choosing to make that history more meaningful than it truly was. Anyhow, by the end, as I was driving 4 hours one way to see him, I obviously had a lot of time to ponder my situation and to truly feel the dissatisfaction and the frustration. And I started to energetically and emotionally let go. I needed to give myself time to do that before I could actually break up with him and let it be truly finished. So I took my time, and I would just emotionally pull away little by little, every week. And on the drives, I would listen to audiobooks and music, and I made myself a playlist. I remember that it was kind of the end, maybe it was the middle of summer. I don't know. It was the summer anyway. And I made myself a playlist of something like 150 songs that were already in my iTunes library, some that I knew really well and some that I didn't know so well. And one of the songs on that playlist was a song called Gold Day by an artist known as Sparkle Horse. And this was a song that I had been familiar with, and I had heard a whole number of times, like years and years and years prior. And I always thought it was beautiful, which is how it ended up on my playlist. But the first time it cycled through on my playlist and it played and I heard it, it was I don't know, it just struck me so much more deeply than it ever had before. It's like it was alive with meaning, but it was a meaning I really didn't understand. It felt like love, like to hear it. And it's not a love song in terms of like the lyrics aren't romantic love based. I'll let you listen to it for yourselves. But anyway, I remember it coming on and it felt like love and closeness. And I just kept putting that song on repeat, and I would listen to it for like an hour of my drive, just straight, just on repeat over and over. And I would do that like multiple times, like not just on that one drive, but I did that for weeks and weeks and weeks. And it never lost its magic and its potency. It just, every time I heard it, it felt like love. That's the best way I can explain it. And part of my process of disentangling from Brian and letting go and disentangling from other people that I kind of had some emotional loose ends with, which I will go into greater detail upon later in a different episode, was that I created an imaginary boyfriend around that time. I think he came to life in the fall, but probably the end of the summer. So I created this imaginary boyfriend because, TBH, I was fucking sick of feeling just dissatisfied in relationships, just feeling frustrated, and I felt like I always had emotional blue balls. I didn't want to feel that way anymore. I either felt like somebody, there was either somebody whose attention I was constantly chasing and constantly sort of like begging for crumbs of their affection, or the other opposite end of the spectrum was somebody who was doing that for me, like who was, way too emotionally needy, and requiring things of me that I just could not give at that time. And there was no happy medium in between. And I got sick of it. And I knew that it was an inside job. But I also felt like I just wasn't interested in having those expectations of somebody else anymore. And I kind of realized that, like, oh, I have an amazing imagination, and I can just imagine what it feels like to have, the boyfriend that I want. Somebody where there's no drama, somebody where it feels like he's truly my best friend and we just laugh together and have fun and listen to tunes and watch movies and snuggle at night, that kind of stuff. So I created this imaginary boyfriend, and at the time that this song, Gold Day, was feeling so meaningful to me, I eventually just chalked it up to like it really resonating with my feeling of my imaginary boyfriend, I guess. But it definitely connected me to the frequency of like a really deep and beautiful love. And I will just leave it there. But that was my first connection with the spirit of Cillian. I just didn't know it at the time. So eventually Brian and I broke up, and I met Alex, and we connected. We met, we had no mutual friends. We just met, randomly one day, and he and I were both in this perfect place to meet and really see each other and really connect. And we sort of courted through email for a while. He recognized that, because we didn't have mutual acquaintances, I might not just want to give my number out right away. And we just got to know each other through email for a little while. And then I gave him my phone number and we started texting. And he asked me out on a date, and we went, and I smiled at him like a psychopath across the table for the entire date and made him do all the talking. Because I was super smitten with him, but he still liked me. And basically, we fell in love. And very early into our relationship, I ended up getting pregnant. It wasn't planned at all. We both we're at a point in our lives, being in our 30s, where we were not interested in dicking around and wasting each other's time. So we kind of cut to the chase and decided, we really liked each other and we wanted to give this a go and not see anybody else. And he was the first person that I felt equally interested in, who really stepped up and acknowledged that I have a son and that it's a package deal, and, had conversations with me about what that would mean, what that looks like, what he would need from me in terms of Francis, which, if I wasn't already in love with him, yeah, he's just incredible. I love Alex. So we had kind of started talking about, what we wanted in life. And it was really early. It was like within, I guess, the first 2 months of meeting each other that we were having conversations about, what we both wanted out of life. And we hadn't got to the point of talking about having kids or not. But I got pregnant anyway. And I remember being really nervous, so excited, because I had just wanted another baby so badly. And it had been 11 years at that point between the birth of Francis and my next pregnancy. I had never gotten accidentally pregnant in between. And I hadn't always been maximum safe, let's put it that way. I had taken some risks, and I was really beginning to wonder if I was only destined to have one child, and whether, I would even be able to get pregnant again, because like I said, I wasn't, it's not that I hadn't practiced precautions, but let's say that my precaution game wasn't at its absolute tightest through the years. But I guess this little soul to be my son was waiting for his specific dad, and it just took a long time for he and I to be emotionally ready for each other. And when we met, as soon as we met, he just snuck in. He just saw his opportunity, and bam, I was pregnant. So I was so excited, and also so nervous about telling Alex. I was afraid that he was going to be mad at me. I was afraid that he would, want me to terminate the pregnancy. Of course, it ran through my mind, we don't know each other very well yet. We're at the very beginning of our relationship. And I knew he was my person. But I also know that Francis's father is one of my deepest soulmates, and I know what it means to have a child. And that sometimes, no matter how deep your connection is, having a child is just a little bit too much stress and responsibility for that connection to survive. So, I had a lot of fears. But I will tell you, none of the fears that I had in my head were that I was going to lose this baby. So I nutted up and I told Alex, and he was amazing. The first thing he said to me was, "You must be really scared." And I just basically melted into his arms at that point. I was like, "You understand." And he didn't ask me that night when I told him. He didn't ask me to make a decision. I don't even think he asked me what I wanted to do. He just said that whatever I wanted to do, it was my decision, and we were in this together, and he supported me. And, and then he just kind of we just sort of held each other in silence for a long time as he tried to wrap his mind around this. To his knowledge, he had never gotten anyone pregnant before either. And so this was brand new for him, brand new. But basically, he was the greatest man ever that I've ever known. And he was just so good to me. So I think it was the next day. And certainly if it wasn't the next day, it was the day after that, that I called him to talk about it. And I remember him saying, like, you're going to keep this pregnancy, aren't you? And I said, yeah, I am. I had already had an abortion when I was just before I got pregnant with Francis in my very early 20s. And I knew that I just really didn't want to have to do that ever again in my life, because it was very emotionally and physically hard to go through that. So, and furthermore, this time I was not in my early 20s. I was in my mid 30s, and I was ready. I was ready to have another baby. I knew what it meant to have another baby, another child. And it is what my heart had desired for so long. So no, I wasn't going to terminate this pregnancy. And I remember him saying, I guess we're having a kid together then. And he was really excited, and we were really excited together. And I just felt so lucky. I couldn't believe this was all happening so fast, and it is a huge testament to the power of manifestation. And dear listener, if you happen to be listening and you are single and you wonder if you will ever meet anybody, and you feel like the clock is ticking and you want a family, you want children, and you wonder if it can ever happen for you, and you feel like it's not going to because time is running out, please take my story as proof that it happens, and if it's meant to be, it happens so fast, and that there is something that's meant to be for you. If you desire it, then it is meant for you. Okay, that little PSA is over. So we were in it, and he started calling me his hot wife, and I started calling him my husband, and we just decided we were really in this together. And we were getting excited. We were making contingency plans, recognizing, like, I wasn't finished. So I was in the midwifery program, and I was about midway through. I had a year left to go, essentially, before I graduated and started working as a midwife. And he had just started the nursing program. So we were both... like, we just did not have certain ducks in a row, but at the same time, we had enough ducks in a row to make it work. And we made a plan of what we were going to do, who was going to take time off of what, how we were going to manage this. And we found an apartment together and moved in together. And, I'm missing an important piece. Okay, let me backtrack a little bit. So this is just an important little thing because it also highlights the magic of Cillian's life. So the day that Cillian was conceived was the day that my grandmother passed away. And that's how he was even conceived at all, because I wasn't on birth control since I hadn't been needing birth control for a spell of time. And so I had every intention to come home and take Queen Anne's lace tincture as a way to prevent an unplanned pregnancy, and potentially go and get Plan B from the pharmacy. That was my intention when I got pregnant with Cillian. And I had met Alex somewhere for a date, and I drove home after the date and arrived to the news that my grandmother had died. And I just completely forgot. That pushed, the fact that Alex and I had sex out of my mind. It pushed the need to go and take some birth control out of my mind. And I completely forgot until about 2 weeks later, when we traveled to Quebec for my grandmother's funeral, and I was expecting my period, and it just never came. So that was a pretty magical piece of it, and it felt very, just very beautiful that as my grandmother left, a new life was conceived. And then also at the time, I had been working at a hospital on a student placement in my labor and delivery nurse rotation. And one night, as I was driving back, I figured this was probably the night that the that he implanted in my uterus. But I was driving back home, and it was a really foggy winter night. And on the side of the road, suddenly there were these two beautiful deer, and they were like feet away from my car. Feet. They weren't in front of my car. There was no risk to my well-being. But they were just standing on the shoulder of the road, and I could have, if there had been a passenger in my passenger seat, they could have rolled down the window and reached out and touched them as I was driving by. That's how close they were. And they didn't run away. They didn't, deer are kind of erratic, and if they are on the shoulder, they'll often jump out right in front of your car because they get, sort of befuddled by the lights. But they didn't. They just stood there and stared at me through the windshield. And I remember feeling like that. I knew, even though I didn't realize I was pregnant, I remember just feeling the magic in that. I thought it was a message from my grandmother at the time, but since then I've come to believe that it was a sort of just a message from spirit in general. Potentially my grandmother and Cillian, since there were two of them. Maybe just Cillian, maybe just spirit. But either way, it was really magical because typically, like, I drive a lot for my job at all hours, day and night. I'm a midwife, so I am driving to births. I live in a humongous catchment area that serves a rural population. So I am serious. I drive a lot at all hours, and I've never seen deer that close to my car ever before. So that was that little magic piece too. Everything at that time felt really enchanted, and almost like everything in my life was sparkly and a little bit prickly with extra electricity. Okay, so Alex and I decided that we were keeping the pregnancy, and we were in this together, and we were starting to make life plans. I let Francis know, and he is probably the most mature and wonderful human being I could ever imagine. And he just told me that it seemed like I had spent a long time maybe dating the wrong people, and that I had finally found the right one, and that he was happy for me. And he hoped that I would have a home birth because he had been born at home, and he hoped I would have a home birth at my parents' house too, and he wanted to be there. And he also told me that when I breastfeed after the baby's born, I don't have to worry about hiding it or going to a different room because he's there, that it's okay. Like, if you could see me right now, you would see hearts in my eyes and hearts all around my head, just thinking about it. He's just the greatest. Okay, so we started to take life steps together and move forward. And of course, I faced the extremely daunting task of telling my family and my friends, but my friends were less scary to tell. I mean, they all knew that I wanted another baby with all my heart, and they also knew that Amy just does things in her own way, on her own timeline, and, they rolled with it. But my family was a different story. I was really stressed out about telling them because, like I said at the end of episode 3, when I got into the midwifery program, it was like, finally, I felt like a person who was on a path that my family understood. I was on a path that was respected. And it just, like, I felt like I was a normal person finally. I was treated like a normal person. I could feel their palpable relief that finally Amy is joining the ranks of normal people, and, she's just going to be a functioning human being finally, for once. And so, of course they absolutely wanted me to meet someone great. And they were super supportive when I first met Alex. And I'm sure they also supported my dreams to have another child. But it was just the speed at which everything happened. So, by then, when I got pregnant, none of them had ever met him. Nobody in my family, none of my friends even had ever met him. We were just dating. So, but I was in my mid-30s and whatever. I wasn't asking anyone's permission. That was one thing. But I still had to tell them, and they had helped me out in so many ways. They were helping me. My parents were helping me with Francis, who, because I had to move around so much for my placements within the midwifery program, he had chosen to stay living at my parents' house in Palmerston so that he could stay at the same school and have a bunch of stability. He's a quadruple Capricorn, so stability is very important to him. And my parents were doing me a huge solid by basically raising him while I finished my education. And so to go and tell them oh, hey, yeah, so yeah, by the way, I literally just met someone and I'm pregnant and I'm having another baby, and the baby is due right in the middle of my last year of school. Cool. Right? It made me so nervous. So I told my mom first, and no, I told my sister Meg first. I told Meg first. I had told her when we were driving after my grandmother's funeral that I'd missed my period, and I thought maybe I was pregnant. And that was so massively insensitive of me. And then when I got my first positive pregnancy test, I sent it to her in a text message. And that was so insensitive because she and her husband had been married for a couple years, and they had been trying, and they hadn't succeeded in getting pregnant. And now she has 2 beautiful children, absolutely gorgeous angels. But at the time, I don't know, I just am so ashamed that it didn't occur to me to think about how much of a slap in the face that would be to her, or how much it would feel that way, that she's married and had been with her husband for 9 years before they got married and had all of her ducks in a row and wasn't getting pregnant at that time. And then to have her stupid older sister, who's, seems to make the most erratic choices, tell her that she's pregnant with some dude that she just met, is just it just must have just been like salt in the wound. And Meg and I are very different. We have very different approaches to life. We don't always see eye to eye. And so I think this was just one of those occasions that really highlighted that difference. So I told Meg first, and that was a stupid thing to do. It was just stupid and insensitive. But of course she had to find out eventually anyway. And then I think I told Andrea next, my youngest sister Andrea. I can't quite remember. I think I did tell her next though. And Andrea has always been in my family. I'm almost certainly, I think everyone would agree that if there's a black sheep in the family, it's me. And Andrea has always been the one who has tried to bridge bridge the distance between the rest of my family and me. It's less necessary now because, we're all more on the same wavelength. But when I was younger, she would try so hard to give me the benefit of the doubt and trust me and believe in me. And she's such a sensitive, wonderful, supportive person by nature. So her response was very much like, okay, like, all right, you're having a baby. And then I told my parents, I told my mom and I told my dad separately. And my mom just automatically assumed that I was going to have to terminate the pregnancy, because my mom is very practical and safety and security are very important to her. And she just couldn't, like, it was just a no-brainer. Like, not that she would ever want me to have a termination, but here I was pregnant and the baby was due in the middle of my last year of school, everything I had worked so hard for, and a career that was finally going to, pay me well and utilize my gifts and all that stuff. And so it was just like, and you just met this guy, like, so like, duh. It's just not the right time. And when I had told Meg, I didn't hear back from her for a while. And when I finally did tell her, or when I did hear back from her, she basically just sent me a text message to say that she knew that I had wanted more kids for a long time and everything, but that she thinks I just make really bad choices. And, basically that she was just not, she thought I was an idiot, essentially. She's like, you make shitty choices and I don't really support this choice or support you, was the general gist of it. And then Andrea sort of, her initial response was like, okay, you're having another baby. And then she kind of thought about it for a couple days and then reached out and was like, I'm really worried about you. And I know she never said the word terminate, but she was just kind of trying to plant the seed from her part that maybe this wasn't a good idea as something to go forward with. So, well, I truly can appreciate how triggering this all must have been for them, how they thought I was finally going to be okay, and it probably felt like I was pulling that rug out from under them with this sudden news and this sudden change. And by then, my mom had met Alex, my parents had met Alex, but I don't think my sisters had. And, for all they just didn't know him, and I didn't have a great track record in terms of like being involved with guys who treated me in the way that I deserved. And not only that, but the last time I had been pregnant and had a baby, it was followed by an extremely, extremely volatile breakup. Yeah. Oh, that's Kieran waking up. So, it's a whole day later. Kieran woke up and needed her mama. So here I am back to finish telling my story for this episode. Okay, so I had told my family, and the consensus among my mom and my two sisters was, this is an irresponsible choice. And although none of them take the idea of abortion lightly at all, and I wouldn't call them pro-lifers, but I also wouldn't call them pro-choicers. I think they just they definitely believe in the sacredness of life, but being related to me and having seen everything that I had gone through on my rather turbulent journey up to that point, and finally seeing me with some stability and a good plan, they just felt like, no, this is not the right time. And the only practical, sensible thing to do was to terminate this pregnancy and, just give it some time and get some ducks in a row and then get pregnant again, which was extremely painful for me to sort of have that response from them. My dad, however, is probably the best dad a girl could ever ask for. He's not perfect. None of us are. But in all the ways that I've really needed him to support me, he always has. And when I told him that I was pregnant, he just gave me a hug. And he said that, he's frequently felt like he doesn't understand my choices, but that he supports me and loves me no matter what. And I think he was genuinely kind of excited. Like, it had been 11 years since a baby had been born into our family, since I had Francis on the rather young side, and he was excited that a little person was coming in to our family again. So that really made me, it was really nice, and I'm so thankful to him, just because it hurt I could understand even at the time where they were coming from, but it genuinely, the way it felt to me was very painful, to have my mom and my sisters not be able to be happy for me and excited for me, and to feel like they didn't really support me or wish me well in this choice. So I do not say any of that to throw my family under the bus at all. They are the literal best. I have been blessed with such an incredible family of origin, and life is complicated, and human emotions are complicated, and circumstances are complicated. But it's an important part of the story that comes in a little later on down the line. So moving on from there. So I was keeping the pregnancy. Alex and I are together, and I'm continuing with school. My insane plan was to basically continue with my program and placement all the way up until the time that he was born, and then to take a month off, or maybe it was October. He was due in October. So I was going to take November and December off. So basically it was the beginning of October he was due. So about 2.5, 3 months off, and then resume placement in January and go overtime with placement beyond the normal dates. It would have been an accommodated plan. And now in hindsight, I'm like, that's insane. And I never would have been able to do it. But that was my crazy plan. And then Alex was going to carry on with school up until then. And then we were going to switch off. And I was going to go back to school at about 3 months postpartum. And he was going to stay and basically be the home parent caregiver. So it was as good of a plan as we could have made at the time. And I was on placement. And so in my third year of the midwifery program, the way it works in Ontario is that in your third year, you no longer do midwifery placements. Instead, you do interdisciplinary placements to help you gain an appreciation for other roles within the maternity care system. And that meant doing things like obstetrical placements following an obstetrician, and labor and delivery placements following a labor and delivery nurse, and a neonatal intensive care unit placement following people working in the neonatal intensive care unit. So I had finished already my OB placement and my L&D placement, and up next was my NICU placement for the neonatal intensive care unit. And the placement that was arranged for me was to be at Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto, which is a big level 3 hospital, meaning that they have like the best of the best equipment, the best specialists. They not only have pediatricians, but they also have neonatologists, and they have respiratory therapists, and all the things, all the equipment, everything to deal with the most extreme cases. And I hadn't specifically requested that placement location. I had, in fact, been hoping to, like, I remember my first request was in Barrie. I had been hoping to be in Barrie as much as possible because that was where I had done a lot of my student work, and I really enjoyed that community. And that's also where Alex was living. And I wanted to be closer to him. So the placement that was made available to me at Sunnybrook wasn't my first choice, but like, it is what it is. And it was a great learning opportunity. So I attended. And I was on the placement my first day there. Kind of nobody even really knew I was coming or like what the fuck to do with me when I got there, which was red flag number one. But I got assigned to follow a respiratory therapist all day that day. And one who was, his job for the day was to attend births. And that was incredible because it meant that not only did I attend term births, mostly C-sections, because in most cases, so a respiratory therapist is someone who their area of specialty is specifically the airways, and they are really specialized, and they are the most skilled at things like intubation and when somebody needs respiratory support, so they need oxygen or continuous positive airway pressure to help keep their lungs inflated. Any type of resuscitation, they have the most knowledge about titrating all of the factors like the oxygen levels and the pressures and everything to best support that individual. So this RT that I was following had been tasked with attending births all day, and they don't normally routinely get called to normal, straightforward births where there's, no resuscitation anticipated. They are more called to the births where it's expected that some support will be required, which meant a couple of term C-sections for reasons I can't recall, but mostly, honestly, it was a lot of preterm births, and they were all cesarean sections for one reason or another. And so the way it worked in that hospital was that in the operating room was one room, and then the panda warmer where a high needs newborn would go was through a set of doors in a different room so that the respiratory therapist would have ample space to work on them. So I just got to see a parade of preterm births in that 12-hour shift, ranging from about, I think the earliest I saw was 27 weeks to 32 weeks. And I got to see what they look like when they come out, how much help they need to start breathing. I got to witness it all. I didn't participate in any of the resuscitations, thank God, because I wasn't qualified to do that at that point. But it was such an amazing learning opportunity. And the next day when I went back to placement, I thought I was going to be doing the same thing, but in fact I was assigned to a nurse within the actual NICU itself. So I wasn't attending births. I was shadowing a nurse whose responsibility it was to provide, it wasn't really one-to-one care, it was like 1-to-2 care because she had 2 babies to be responsible for, but it was in like a level 3 NICU where they each had their own individual room. It wasn't a ward unit. They all had their own room, their own isolate. And I got to be part of rounds. So that's when the medical team of specialists goes through every baby case by case. So the neonatologist and the pediatrician and the respiratory therapist and the nurse and the dietitian and everybody who would be involved in that baby's care. I got to see rounds and see what it means, like what goes into caring for such high needs babies, because those weren't like the late preterm babies. Because it's a level 3 hospital, it was reserved for the ones who really needed like the big guns in terms of support. And I remember seeing a beautiful little baby who had been born preterm at 25 completed weeks gestation, and they thought they were detecting seizure activity in this sweet little baby, and seizure activity is so much harder to see in newborns, that it doesn't present as a grand mal seizure. So it's more like strange random clonic movements. So they had thought that they were seeing that, and they ordered an ultrasound of his head to get an idea of what was going on. And I was given the opportunity to watch the ultrasound in real time and see how it works, and how they ultrasound a baby's head, and how to see bleeding in the brain, which is a big risk, a common risk, seizures and brain bleeds for very preterm babies. So I got to see all this stuff and see the reality of what it means for a baby who was born very preterm, what life looks like, what kind of interventions they require on a constant 24/7 basis, and that baby did not have, they were expecting that the outcome was really poor for him, and that he was going to be switched over to palliative care with the plan to eventually remove his life support and let him go, because he was just not thriving, and in fact was suffering. And so, at that point I was so early in pregnancy that I was just in my student mind, and I thought, wow, what an amazing opportunity to see these things firsthand. And little did I know that in a brief matter of months, I was going to be living through that myself. So after not even half a shift, like a quarter of a shift on the second day, so I did one full 12-hour shift, and then I showed up and did maybe like 3 hours in the morning in the NICU, and then I suddenly was pulled off of the floor, and I was explained by hospital personnel who do all these things, insurance things, that there was a lapse in my insurance because the insurance agreement between my school and the hospital had timed out at midnight, and they hadn't been able to come to a new agreement. So I had no insurance, and that meant that I was a tremendous liability in the hospital, not only for my interaction with any patients, should there be any, poor outcome, whether it was related to my presence or not, but even like if I were to slip and fall. I had no insurance as a student, and the hospital was incredibly liable just based on my presence. So I was very kindly asked to leave immediately. And that was the end of my placement at Sunnybrook. And I had a different placement arranged for me quite quickly after that. But I absolutely know that Cillian was preparing me for what was to come. So I was pulled from that placement, and another placement was arranged for me at a different hospital in a different community. And, I carried on with that. And I'm going to be totally honest that I totally nursed a really big woe is me victim mentality grudge about my mom and my sisters, not really being on board and excited for me at that point. And not so much around Andrea, because she just has a different way about her where she's like extremely sensitive and big-hearted, and I didn't feel judged by her. But I definitely felt like my mom and Meg were not fond of me and my choices at that time, and I just ran with it, like, in a way that kind of makes me feel ashamed, but also, again, #human. But I would just sort of go over these scenarios in my head about, like, especially Meg, because at that point she wasn't even talking to me. She just needed some time and some space to, like, come to terms with the fact that I was surprise pregnant with the baby of someone I had only just started seeing. But I would sort of like play over these scenarios in my head about, like, having the baby and not letting them know, or if I did the at the time it was called IPS, Integrated Prenatal Screen for Down syndrome, trisomy 18 and trisomy 13, as well as spina bifida. It's a different test now, but at the time I thought if I had a positive result from that and it turned out that my baby had one of those things and I had to terminate the pregnancy, that I just wouldn't ever tell them, and I wouldn't accept their love and support and condolences. It's like I feel so ashamed admitting that right now because it was super drama and not a productive thing to nurture at all, but it is what it is. I just felt really sorry for myself and really rejected, and I ran with it. And it's important to say, because again, it comes about later in the story. But my integrated prenatal screen results came back normal, and the pregnancy looked totally normal, and everything was going fine. Alex and I found an apartment together, and we moved in together, and that was really cool. He and I have always had a great relationship, despite all the really hard stuff we were thrown into right off the bat. But it was really cool to be taking those steps with my person, who I had waited a really long time to meet. And I remember lying in bed with him one day, and I felt the need to say out loud that not all pregnancies result in live babies. It's like I just had to acknowledge it out loud to myself and in front of him. But the weird thing is that I didn't feel like that applied to me. It's like I just had to say it. I had never felt that in my pregnancy with Francis. I didn't feel like I was going to have a miscarriage. This was probably at around 10 or 11 weeks, so, still quite early. It felt like I just had to say it. I just had to say it, but my conscious mind didn't think anything of that. In fact, I probably just assumed I was saying it because I had just done, placements with, in a neonatal intensive care unit and a special care nursery at a different hospital. So, it was just my way of, I think, releasing a little bit of the tension, but it was more than that too. It was more than that, but my conscious mind didn't know it. So around the end of my first trimester, Meg reached out to me, and my mom kind of adjusted to the new plan, if you can call it that, as best as she could. She is a Taurus and just doesn't do well with sudden changes, huge, dramatic, life-altering changes of plans. But she had adjusted, and Meg reached out to me, and Meg and Andrea and I got together, and we made our peace, which felt really, really good because I love my sister so much. And it just was like a huge relief. As much as I nurse grudges, I am also like so fast to forgive. I am a very, very, very skilled forgiver. It comes very naturally to me. And as soon as conflict is resolved, I truly, truly let it go. So it felt like a huge weight off my mind and off my heart. I still had a lot of stress because, of course, I worried whether Alex... Basically, I wondered if I was going to be able to keep the baby and keep Alex, and what it would mean for our relationship to become parents together so early on, like before we even hit our 1-year anniversary. But, we had made our commitment and we were moving forward. So by then, my placement rotation had changed, and I was assigned to a placement. It was considered a designated population placement, working with a specific subset of the population just to get exposure and experience. And I had chosen the Barrie Native Friendship Centre in Barrie, Ontario, which was an amazing place to have a placement. They are wonderful, welcoming, open-hearted, transparent people, or at least the ones who were there when I was there, were. And I learned a lot while I was there. And in addition, it was nice because before my family and I had sort of made up, or my mom and my sisters and I had come to terms with my pregnancy and gotten on the same side together again. The people at the Friendship Center they were nothing but excited that I was pregnant. And in their mind, it was like big families are a thing. Having lots of children is a thing. There was no concept of like having your ducks in a row before you have kids. Like, this was just like, what? Like, you have kids and they're always a blessing. And that was a really beautiful energy to be in, really beautiful to be celebrated and doted over in my first trimester at that placement. And one day, so I was living in a town that was about a 35-minute to 40-minute drive away. And one day I was on my way into placement. It was the end of my placement. I was about 13 weeks and maybe 4 or 5 days pregnant. And there was a plan for a big, it was like an Easter feast or something like that. And I felt like I should come because sharing food was such an important big deal at that Friendship Center, a really important part of the culture that they celebrate, that you get together and you eat together and you share food. And so I really I just didn't feel well, and I just didn't want to go, not because of the feast, but I just didn't want to go in general. I kind of had like the pregnancy blahs, but I felt like I really should. And furthermore, the center had been closed that morning because there had been an ice storm or freezing rain or something like that. And I just didn't want to leave. But I didn't honor my intuition and my desires. And I forced myself to go because I felt like I should go, when in truth, it wouldn't have even mattered if I was there or not. Like, I was totally inconsequential to the enjoyment of the feast by everybody who was there. And life would have carried on if I hadn't gone. But I was being, air quotes, a good student and telling myself I should go, and so I went. And while I was on the road, I was just coming into town. I was about a block and a half away from the Friendship Center, which was just down the road. I got into a fender bender. So basically what happened was the roads were slick with the freezing rain, which had turned to rain by this time. But they were slick, and somebody up ahead, I was in the left lane of a 2-lane road in town, and somebody, like several cars ahead, was turning left, but it seemed like maybe they didn't give enough notice for everybody behind them. So suddenly we were stopping, and I barely had enough time to brake without, hitting the person in front of me, but I did. But the person behind me didn't have enough time to brake. So I got hit from behind, and then my car hit the person who was in front of me. And the damage to my vehicle was very minimal. The damage to any of the vehicles was very, very minimal. And my vehicle was like ancient anyway. And I wasn't planning on getting it fixed. I didn't bump my head, but I was in a state of shock. It wasn't at high speeds, but it was, it was a significant enough impact. And so I let the people at the Friendship Center know, and they were like, go home, please, right now for a while, and you need to go get checked out. And they were totally concerned about my pregnancy. Totally, totally concerned. And as a midwifery student, I was thinking, well, what can anybody even do? Like, who's going to check me out? And how are they going to know anything? Like, maybe they can hear the heartbeat right now. Oh, and I had just felt Cillian move like a couple days before for the first time. It was really cool. So I kind of knew he was still in there, and I wasn't worried. I wasn't bleeding or anything. It didn't feel like a big impact, but it did feel big enough for me to be in shock and like to have broken out in some hives. So anyway, they insisted I go home, and I did. I went to be with Alex, and we spent some time together, and then I just to be honest, I just kind of like forgot and didn't make a big fuss out of it. I let the woman who rear-ended me, who did the damage to my car, I let her know I wasn't planning on getting it fixed, and I got rid of her phone number, and that was that. Until about 10 days later, when I was 15 weeks exactly, one morning I was getting ready to go do something else for school, and all of a sudden I felt all this warm liquid coming out of me. And I sat down on the toilet and pulled down my pants, sat down on the toilet, and my underwear was full of, to me, it looked like bloody amniotic fluid. And I am quite familiar with the smell of amniotic fluid, what it looks like, and I'm quite convinced that it was amniotic fluid. And there was a lot, and I think that made the blood look like more, but it felt like a lot for how early on I was. And my heart just sank. I had not anticipated this at all. I was totally set on having this baby. I was devastated, and I was in shock. Anyway, I will leave it there for today because, again, as usual, very long episodes. And next week I will come back with the next part, which will be the rest of the pregnancy. Things start getting quite dramatic from this point onward. So, yeah. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. It's a very, very tender and personal story for me, so I truly, truly, truly appreciate your listening ears. And yeah, it's tender and personal and vulnerable and painful, but like I said, the whole reason I'm sharing it is because it's also very guided and full of magic. I hope you all have a beautiful day wherever you are, whatever you're doing. I hope that you see the magic in your day as well. If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, then please share it. Take a screenshot of yourself listening to it. Tag me on your social medias and post it to your stories, and then I'll know that you were listening. Or share it with a friend, or leave me a rating and or a kind review, which will just help my podcast to really show up more on iTunes when people search for things under the topic of spirituality. It would mean a lot to me to be able to share it. But what genuinely means the most to me is that you're even here listening at all. I appreciate it so much. If you are interested in any of the topics that I'm talking about, any of the sort of the magic of the universe, the manifestations, the true nature of time, space, and reality, the Akashic records, soul journeys, past lives, those kind of things, then consider joining my Facebook group, Soul Space, over on Facebook. So SOULSPACE. That is where I do a bunch of lives and post a bunch of memes and go on some extended rants about these various topics. Yeah, thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Hey, fellow traveler. Welcome to Third Eye Awakening, a podcast all about spiritual and psychic awakening, where we talk about the shift from 3D to 5D consciousness, the nature of time, space, the universe, multi-dimensions, starseeds, the Akashic records, all that good shit. I am your host, Amy Melissa. Thank you so much for being here with me today. All right, let's do this.